Hello, thanks for coming along to my session. Today I'm going to show you some tips on how to build inclusive power apps. Before I get started, I want to thank all our sponsors, ScriptRunner, DQ Global, Proximo 3, Red Spear, Agilicis, and Hitachi Solution. Without your contribution, this event wouldn't be a success. Also, I want to give a very big shout out to all the organizers for putting in all the hard work to make this event happen. I'm Elaine Yu. I'm from Melbourne. You can call me Elaine, or some people call me E or Lainey as well. I'm a Microsoft Business Application MVP and I love Power Apps. If you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. And if you enjoy Power Apps content, do subscribe to my YouTube channel because I occasionally post videos on me testing out new features in Power Apps. So before I get into the whole how to design Power Apps, let's first talk about what is inclusive app design. So let's first stress on the word inclusive. So what does inclusive means, right? Inclusive means everything and everyone. So inclusive app design means having an app that to cater for everyone or majority of the people in this case. So there's three points that we need to cater for when we build an inclusive design. The first one is accessible. So an accessible app means that it's usable for everyone of different accessibility. For instance, hearing impairment, visual impairment, motor disability, cognitive disability, and speaking disability. Second, the app should not discriminate, which means the app has to be user-friendly. The UI UX on the application have to cater for everyone. So for instance, if you build an app with a target audience of who speaks all three Chinese, Spanish, and English, then your app should have a translator that able to translate to these three languages and should not be focused on one language because you might have people who do not know that language. So if it's an English app, you have to make sure that the app able to be translated into Spanish and Chinese as well so that they are able to use the app. The third one would be demographic. So this actually talks about a wider audience over here. It could be a demographic based on region or the type of people. So one instance, we look at maybe the old age, the older generations. So they would need more assistance when using the app because first, they are not familiar with the technology. And secondly, a lot of people in that category have eyesight or hearing issues already. So your app needs to be simple and have a large text and easy to use as well. So secondly, it could also cater for the group of people who do not want to use the touchscreen and wants to use a keyboard. So this could be by choice or they are forced to do it because you have some form of disability, right? So you could have motor disability and you couldn't use the touchscreen, so you need to use the keyboard, or it could be just because of preference. So you have to ensure that your app has keyboard support enabled and able to use the shortcut keys. So these three are very important consideration that we need to think about when we build an inclusive app design. So secondly, why inclusive design? According to Microsoft, nearly everyone has a disability at some point, either temporary or permanent. So this statement is very powerful and we need to focus on the word temporary over here because whenever we talk about disability, I think the first thing that comes to our mind is someone that is blind or deaf or could not walk, have mobility issues, or have cognitive disability. But this is not the case. If you do a Google search, disability just means that there is some physical or mental problem that prevents you from doing certain activities like talking or moving or seeing things or listening to things. So this issue, this physical or mental problem that you have might be temporary or situational. So one example I'll give you is if, let's say, went skiing and I broke my wrist. So I could not use the phone when I'm in rehab for, let's say, for 2-3 weeks or maybe a month because my wrist is broken. I couldn't use the touchscreen. So I'm disabled during that whole period of rehabilitation, and that is temporary disability. Another example is if I go to the bar and it's really noisy and I couldn't hear my phone because you know how musics are in the bar, it could get really loud, you have to shout at each other. So I couldn't access my app if my app needs me to communicate with it, or I couldn't hear the notification. So I need some other ways to be able to communicate with my app. So basically, an inclusive design is having an app design that give you another option on how to access the app besides the natural way, which is the touch screen, the tap on the open the app, the normal way that you do it. This is giving an alternative way if you do not have the ability to do that. So there's 4 main types of disability over here. The first one is motor disability, which means that you are not able to use the touch screen, or by choice, you just don't want to use the touch screen. Second one is visual impairment. So this is not just blind people, and another misconception about blind is that we think that blind people see darkness. They don't. Visual impairment means that someone who have low vision or colorblind or have some issues with their eyesight that could not be corrected by glasses or contact lens or operations or any medical devices. Thirdly, someone with cognitive disability such as dyslexic, maybe they have learning disability, they couldn't read, or it could also be a disability that a language disability, a language barrier, which means I couldn't understand a certain language. Doesn't mean I have problems with my brain or anything, right? And the fourth one is the hearing and speaking disability. So this is normally hearing loss or couldn't hear properly at a certain situation, like the example I've given where I'm in a bar and everything is really loud. So that is hearing disability. So Power Apps have included various functions for you to build an inclusive apps. So this feature has made it really easy for us to design inclusive apps, such as screen reader support. It also enables keyboard support. You can configure the font, the layout, the color. It has accessibility checker, and this is really useful because it means that every time after you build an app, you can run the accessibility checker to make sure that your app adhere to the accessibility standards. And as well as multimedia support, which means you can include captions, closed captions into your videos. I'm not going to touch into details on all these features. You can read more of them in the Microsoft Docs, but I'm going to briefly show you how to do it when I go into the tips on how to build an inclusive Power App. So now I'm going to give you the tips on how to build an inclusive Power Apps. First of all, we must always follow the accessibility guideline. So there is a whole bunch of standards and accessibility that's been put together by a group of experts on how we can build apps and web contents that can be used by people of all groups of disability. So what Microsoft have done is they have put together a white paper that comply to this standard to show you how you can turn on the accessible function for all the elements you have in Power Apps. So I'll just show you how the white paper look like. So this is basically the link to the white paper. I highly recommend you keep this in favorite because this would be your Bible every time you build an app if you want to build an inclusive app, which you should anyway. So if you look at the table, fairly easy to use because it shows you how to turn on keyboard accessibility. It goes by element. So if you are building a button, for instance, then you will just go to the button and you will go through what are the standards and that you need to use, like what you need to do to turn on accessibility, like putting the text label, enabling the accessible label so that screen reader will read it. Also, in this white paper, it does give you some tips on how to test your apps to make sure it's accessible. It gives you examples of a few software you can use besides the accessibility checker and how to use them, such as accessibility insights as well as color contrast checker, where you can actually check the colors to make sure that is user-friendly for the colorblind and the contrast is large enough so that a person with low vision able to use them. So highly recommended. You need to get this white paper into your favorites. And also one thing is that because Microsoft constantly updates it if there's a new element, so I wouldn't recommend you download a copy. Just open up the link in case there's any new updates that you miss. So next, layout and colors. Layout and colors is very important in the app design. Even for someone with perfect eyesight and able-bodied, layout and colors on the app is very crucial. Because if you don't have a good layout or you don't have a good contrast between the colors and the app is not really easy to read and not user-friendly, people will be very reluctant to use your app. So when you build an app, make sure that your text is large and easy to read and the language is understandable. This is very important with the language. Don't use technical language for your labels. Don't put your system name on the labels. Make sure that people know what is it all about. Second thing, always use a color contrast checker. Based on WCAG standard, the contrast ratio between your background and your foreground must always be larger than a ratio of 4:3:1. So it's very hard to gauge what is 4:3:1. Like I wouldn't know what is 4:3:1 and you need to do a whole calculation. Don't worry, don't need to do that. You just need to download the color contrast checker, put in the color that you want to use for the background and then the color for the button and then the color for your text, and it would automatically tell you whether this passed WCAG standard or not. So there's a lot of different color contrast checker in the market. If you go to Google and just put in color contrast or color contrast checker, you'll see a whole list of free website or software or application that you can download. The one that I'm currently using, which I find very user-friendly, is the Chrome add-on. It's called Chrome Color Contrast Checker. So all I need to do is put in the colors and then it will straight away tell me whether it passes or it fails WCAG checker. I'll show you in a moment when I demo the app. The third one is regarding pop-up windows. So I think it's very common for all of us to use visibility property when you build a pop-up window, but this is not accessible friendly. It's not screen reader friendly because when you have a pop-up window, you want the screen reader to only read the pop-up window because that's the message you want to send to the person, right? That, hey, your form has been submitted successfully. But when you use visibility condition, the screen reader might still read the controls at the back, and this would confuse the user because then the user would not be very sure what's happening. Like, couldn't visualize. Imagine if you have the screen open and it's reading every control including the pop-up window, you might not send a clear message to the user. Next one is, if you have a hyperlink, it's best to use a button and not just a hyperlink. Just because screen reader reads the button text. So if you use a hyperlink, then you read the whole hyperlink, which is not ideal. So the button could have a friendly message that says, go to page A on the website, or maybe it's trying to navigate to a certain page. Instead of reading the whole link, it just reads the button text message. So that is more user-friendly. And lastly is the navigation flow. So navigation flow is extremely crucial to people who use the keyboard. Always make sure that the tabbing is right, and any input element, make sure the tab is enabled. I'll show you more in the demo later. So the recommended flow is top to bottom, left to right. I actually personally do not mind left to right, top to bottom as well, as long as it's in order, because it'll be so irritating when if I use a keyboard and I hit tab and it goes all over the place. I don't think anyone likes that, and I don't think that is very good design as well. Number 3, allow keyboard shortcut and enable keyboard support. So these days, if you look at all the tablets, it comes with a keyboard. You have an option to add a keyboard to it. And also you can always buy Bluetooth keyboard to connect it to your phone, like what I did. And it becomes an option now for consumers, a choice on whether they want to use the touchscreen or use the keyboard. So I think it is mandatory for all apps to enable keyboard support. Lucky for us, Power Apps has a built-in keyboard support, and all we need to do is make sure that the UI we design is user-friendly when you use the keyboard. So 2 important tips on that. One is make sure the navigation flow is in order, like what I've mentioned in the previous slide. You have to go from top to bottom and left to right. That is the WCAG standard. And secondly, make sure that the focus is visible. So focus, this is the border. Make sure that every input element have a border, and the color is of high contrast with your background so that the user knows where they are at on the screen. So it's the same like using a system on your computer, right? When you tap, you want to know which element you're on. So any element that requires an input, or as long as you allow the user to tap to the element, it should have a focus indicator visible, or else it'll be very confusing for the users. So number 4, screen reader support. In this world, there are 4 or 5 screen reader. You have iOS, you have VoiceOver, you have narrator in Windows, TalkBack in Android, and a couple more which I can't remember on top of my head. But if you have enabled screen reader or tried playing with screen reader on the phone, you will notice that it reads every element on the phone, including the date, the time, everything you click on, it will read and interact with the user. So this is very important for people who have visual impairment, or someone that couldn't read, whether it's due to cognitive disability or language barrier. They can still interact with the phone. So because Power Apps have screen reader support, what we need to do is when we design the app, we ensure that we have configured it so that the screen reader will read the label of the input elements when the user opens the app. So there's a few key things we need to remember for screen reader support. First thing is the screen name needs to be understandable. So this is when you add a new screen, so it default says screen 1, right? We always tend to write shortcuts that we will rename it as SCRN gallery, for instance, or SCRN list. So the screen reader can't actually read SCRN. It'll be like screen. It won't be screen, so it's not understandable. And also, it'll be good to have a screen name that has a meaning to it, so the user know what screen they're on and they're able to easily navigate back to the screen. Second thing is input elements are screen reader enabled. So any input elements that requires interaction with the user, use your screen reader enabled so the user would know what is it. Third, use accessible label instead of tooltip property. This is because there are some screen readers who doesn't pick up tooltip, so it's better to use the accessible label because it's picked up by all screen readers. Next, interactive. So the app has to be interactive. When you use the app, you need to know what is happening on the app. This is again a very important design element, whether it's for the able-bodied or the disabled users, right? If I open the app and the app is trying to load the data, it should have a loading spinner. It should also have a label that interactive label that tells the user that the app is trying to load a data so that the user know what is happening, because no one likes to be left hanging when they are using the app, especially these days. All of us have such short attention span. If the app doesn't do anything in the next 2-3 seconds, we probably just close the app. So another thing very crucial with interactivity is especially people who rely on screen reader, right? They can't see what is happening on the app. So if they do a search, let's say you have a gallery and you can search for a list of shoes. So I want to search for high heel boots because I want to buy boots. So I go to the app, I search for high heel boots. If the app doesn't tell me what is my search result, how many search results there is, I wouldn't know if there's none in my search. Like, I wouldn't know what happened because I'll enter long high knee black boots and then it ends there. So it'd be good, I mean, you have to, like the app should come back and say, hey, there's 3 search results. You can now select which boots you want to buy. So everything you click on, you must make sure that it interacts with the user so the user know what is happening. So that is interactive app, as well as unless there is a specific reason not to, I think all the apps should be responsive, so that when you turn your app from landscape to portrait, the layout is responsive and it'll be, you know, in the right order, in the right placement. So I think that is quite important as well. So unless there's a specific reason why your app has to be in that particular layout, you should build a responsive layout application. Next is accessibility check. So after you build any app, you should run the debugger, right? So you also should look at the accessibility section. A lot of us tend to ignore it. This is the out-of-the-box Power Apps accessibility checker. So when you run a check, it will actually tell you if there's errors on the form. It will give you a warning, and it's also have a section that tells you what you need to fix to make sure that it's accessible. So it's very important to run that. Another thing is that I've mentioned previously, use the color contrast checker just to make sure that the colors that you're using is friendly for all types of individual. And lastly, you can also extend your accessibility features by using Azure Cognitive Service. For instance, if you have an app that is for everyone, like the check-in app for COVID. So at the moment, I think it's the same for a lot of us in the world. We have to check in at every restaurant or any public places that we go to, right? But I mean, the app has to be user-friendly for everyone because it has to be usable by everyone in public. So if someone couldn't enter the information using touch and do not have a keyboard because you don't carry your keyboard around, the easiest way is to tell the app to input the information. So to do that, you can use the speech to text. And if you want the app to be translated in different language, because not everyone can use to understand the common language in the country, because despite if the country's common language is English, it doesn't mean all the 10 million people or everyone in the country able to understand English. So it'd be good to have a translator, and for that you can use the Microsoft Translator to do it. So that is my 7 tips on how to build an inclusive Power Apps. So if you have any other tips that I've not mentioned here, feel free to share it with me on the chat, okay? So now let's go to the fun bit, which is demo time. I'll show you an app I built that can be supported by the screen reader. So let me first open my app and share my screen. It's finally working now. So the first thing I'm gonna do is to turn on the screen reader. Different OS have different screen readers. I'm using an iPhone, so mine is voiceover. I'm just gonna go down to accessibility and turn it on. So you see here that it also allows me to change the speed of the screen reader's voice, how fast it speaks. I'm just going to leave it as default for now.
Voiceover on. Settings. Accessibility. Back button.
So once you have turned on the screen reader, your navigation around the phone kind of change. Like it's different. You need a different way on how to return back to home screen, how to open an app. I recommend you read up how to use the phone once the screen reader is turned on beforehand, because it took me quite a while to get used to this.
Accessibility.
I'll just go and open the Power Apps now.
Settings. Set accessibility button. Settings. Back button.
Just trying to go back to home.
Switch control off button. Apple TV general heading. Settings. Page 1 of 2. Page 2 of 2. Power Apps. May 3. Music and run at page 3 of 3. SS Inclusivity App. Author. SS Inclusivity App. SS Inclusivity App opening. Ellipsis. Button. Play. 4 items found.
Yeah, so this is an app built using gallery control. So this is basically a list of masks, different types of masks. What I've done here is I've enabled most of the elements on the form is screen reader enabled. So if I click on any of it, screen reader will read it out to me. So if I click on masks, yeah, now I click on baby pink.
Gallery, baby pink color, button.
Yeah, so that is how screen reader works. If you enable screen reader for the particular elements on your Power Apps, it will read them. If you had it turned off, when the user tap on it, then it wouldn't read it out to you. So if the user can't see or doesn't have access to look at the screen, when they tap on it, they wouldn't know what is it. So what I've done here is also I've created a search function, because I want to show you how the app interact with the user. It's just a simple one where I search, and then the screen reader will tell me how many items found based on the search. So I'll just search by color.
Enter color to search for mask. Search. Enter color to search for mask. Text field is edit. Cap B. Cap 3 items found.
Yeah, see how it tells me that there's 3 items found. So this is what I meant by having interaction between the app and the user, because if it doesn't read out 3 items found, the user would not know that there's 3 items found. Another thing is also you can decide what you want the screen reader to read. You can configure that. So if you want to say, if already is baby pink color, but you just want it to say pink, so when you configure it, you just configure pink. So the screen reader will read pink and not baby pink color. Same goes for images as well. It's up to you to put in the description on how you want screen reader to read the image. It can be as simple as one word or a sentence. One thing I want to highlight is because if you notice, as I click, the screen reader reads everything that I click on. The best practice is you only enable screen reader support for input elements. So
Gallery.
if you
Enter quantity button.
So if you do not need the user to interact with the element, it's best not to enable the screen reader. Another thing I want to show here is, you see how if I click on baby pink color,
Baby pink color button.
there's a white border, so that is the focus border, and that would help if someone is using the keyboard. So when they tap, you can see that the border is focused on the border. You know where you're tabbing on. Actually, it's also very useful for someone like me who is now using touchscreen, because if I touch on it,
Sunflower button.
I don't know what I touch on because there's no border on it. So another thing to ensure is that the contrast of the border and the background is complied to the WCAG standard, which is, I think, contrast must be same or more than 3:1. So use your color contrast checker to make sure what all the colors you use comply with the standards that's already been set. So now I'm just gonna show you
Screen dimmed.
power apps on how I configure some of these elements and how to use color contrast checker. Let's go there now. Let me just close this first. So this is my power apps. Over here I have a few different elements. I have images and label. So for things like images and icon, when you click on it, you'll see something called accessible label. So as of now it is blank. This blank means the screen reader would not read it. So if you want the screen reader to read it, then you have to put in some captions. And maybe you want to say this pink mask. Make it simple, because or else it'll be a long sentence. Unless there's a lot to describe, I say make it as simple as possible. Same goes for icon as well. These icons have action, like this one is an exit icon. So if you go to exit icon, accessible label, you should mark it as exit, so that when the user touch it, it will say that this is the exit icon or this is exit. And it depends on the user. If they really want to exit, they'll double click on it. So for label is a little bit different. So this is a label. On a label, you have something called live. So live has 3 different selection. One is live polite, 3 different properties. So live polite, live assertive, and live none. And probably just none. Off. Yeah. So live off means screen reader would not read it. Live assertive means screen reader will take priority to read it. It will interrupt every other announcement and it reads that first. So if you have an alert or something that you want to immediately tell the user, you will use assertive. Like for items found, the search result, I use assertive because as soon as I search, I want the user to straight away know the result. So it takes priority of every other labels on the form. Now, Next thing I want to show you is how to make it keyboard accessible. We spoke about the focus border. So there is two properties that you need to always be aware of. Actually three. One is the border color. What color is it? And then the focus border color and the focus border thickness. So always make sure that the thickness is more than 0. And focus border color. So focus border color depend how you set it up. You could set it up different color from the border, but if you set up same color with the border color, then make sure that your border color is a high contrast with the form, with the background color of the form. Next thing you have to do, if you want the user to be able to tap and navigate to it on the keyboard, then ensure that the tap index is 0. So it's either 0 or -1. It's never other number. If you don't want the user to navigate to it, it's -1. If you want user to navigate to it while the keyboard is 0. So anything that is an input element, you should have tap index. Last thing I want to show is the color contrast checker. You can use any color contrast checker, but here I'm using the Chrome add-in. So I'll show you how it works. Now, once I install the add-in, you can see the logo over here. And at the bottom here, you can see the contrast checker. And how you read this is AA means pass, AAA means excellent. So obviously the aim is always to get AAA, but I think AA it means acceptable as well. And you see how it's relative to the font, related to the font size. So depending on your font size, the contrast, acceptable level of the contrast is different. So now if I want to show yellow and black, I want to check what is the contrast ratio for it and does it pass WCAG. All I do is I click on this highlight here, I tap, see how the cursor change to plus sign, become black, and then I click on this and I tap on the yellow. If you find it hard to tap, you can also just select from the color picker. But by tabbing this way, you make sure that you get the accurate color, unless you have the color code. So as you can see here, this is perfect. Whether it's small font size or large font size, it passes the color WCAG color standard. But if I change this to, let's say, maybe blue, yeah, then see it pass as well. But if I change it to something more darker, probably, let's try something more darker like purple, then see how the ratio 2.31, it feels both small and large font. So sometimes you may run into situation where your color contrast will pass if the font size is large, but fail when the font size is small, because the larger the font size, the lesser the contrast needs to be. So that's all for my presentation today. I hope you enjoy it and you have learned something. And I would like to end this presentation with yet another quote. So I want to end this with a quote by Marcus Osterbert. Marcus said that when speaking of disabilities, the blind and their needs are most often used as an example. It is deceivingly simplistic, since accessibility is something that most of the population can benefit from. So this kind of sums up all that I have presented today. When we talk about inclusiveness, it means everyone, and we shouldn't think about disability. We shouldn't think of disability as just someone with permanent disability like blind or deaf. Inclusiveness benefits everyone and not just the disabled. Like what Microsoft has quoted, every one of us will face temporary disability depending on the situation. So let's all start building inclusive apps. That's all for my presentation today. Thank you. If you have any questions, leave it on the chat, or you can connect with me and we can chat further in LinkedIn or Twitter. Thank you. Bye.